AI has been around as an idea since the mid-'60s. It hasn't worked since the mid-'60s, but the idea came up then. And some pretty smart folks said, we're going to go to a summer camp, literally, in New Hampshire. We think we'll solve this over the summer. It's a really funny story. They didn't. In the 80s, we had expert systems. And expert systems were when you first started to hear about useful AI. And that was basically a bunch of rules. The problem is you can't write enough rules to recognize a face, unless it's like mine, where it's a face for radio, but otherwise not so much. That kind of ran out of gas. And then around 2013, we had the next round, which was deep learning. And deep learning it's not important how, but they used a bunch of math where they would take thousands and millions of examples of something and teach a system to recognize that. And that's where you've got really structured data. You can think of it as like 1,000 pictures of cats and a label that says cat, 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 and then other pictures of dogs that say dog, 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 dog. And you run that through a system and train it to be able to recognize a dog versus a cat. And in fact, the first time this really came out was, as I say, at Stanford University, there was a competition about dog breeds. And there was a total step change. It was 20% better than anything else. That's structured data. And the AI that we've been used to for the last decade or so really needed things to be in rows and columns to work. And that's where you spent a lot of time prepping data and making sure that the decimals were right. And there's just a lot that you needed to get right, because it's not that different. If you're in Excel and you import a bunch of numbers, and some of them are formatted as like number, and some of them are formatted as like general, and some are text, and then you try to say sum this column, it won't, because the data is formatted differently, even though it looks the same. I don't know if you've ever done that, but it drives me nuts when I'm pulling in data that does that all the time. Well, that's some of what the Nathan was referring to before, is the construction, most industries, but the construction industry has not gone through and make sure that all their data is in the same format so you can do math against it. That's super expensive. And, there's a whole thing. Do we start doing it now and then our old data doesn't match with our new data? It's like the classic conundrum of when do we just bite the bullet and change? And you're seeing people do that. So that's sort of structured data. Semi-structured data is something like, text that is in paragraphs or in kind of in a format that you understand. Specifications can be like that because there's a standard way that you write them, the CSI page format. Unstructured is this conversation. So if you were to take the transcript from this and try to do something with it, it's not structured. It's just us talking. Right now, these large language models are able to do something with that. And to get back to finalizing the question, deep learning it's basically a lot of math that can recognize and predict things. When you take water from 33 degrees and make it, 31 degrees, it changes. Sometimes more is different. And that's what happened here. Is there's some algorithms that they changed, specifically a thing called the transformer, but also just an insane amount of data. They trained these new models that can now do things that are really different. They don't just kind of predict whether that's a dog or not. They predict what you might say next so well that they can write. It's really weird. I don't think they knew this would happen, but it can actually write for you. So you're seeing with ChatGPT, you say, hey, write me a 400-word essay on the Construction Progress Coalition. And it'll be able to do that. Nathan might not like it, but it'll be able to do that. That was never true before. The ability to generate things based on having seen the whole internet is really new. And what that does is it allows it to understand things with way more context than any other thing could do. Often better than a human, and often it misses crazy things that a human would never miss. I mean, it's a funny blend of absolute crazy excellence and really surprising stupidity.
But I think herein lies the difference between the public domain of, like a CPC, you can scrape CPC's website and get all that information and I probably wouldn't like it because I don't like what's on the website anyway. But that's how things work in iterations. But I think, at the end of the day, the private stuff is what's challenging, right? Like you want to find information that you find out you actually don't have access to, even though in theory, maybe you should, and kind of breaking down some of those barriers is really, I think, a lot of what the link is trying to do, right, is kind of break down some of those different cross-party barriers and make it easier to share what data that was maybe private and just taking parts of it and sharing it with other companies.
That's exactly right.
Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think so. It's worth keeping in mind, in October of 2022, none of this conversation was happening, right? So 8 months ago, this wasn't a thing. Everybody, well, not everybody, lots of people knew about GPT-3, and it was like, wow, that's so cool, but it's unsteerable. I mean, we looked at it seriously, and it wasn't something you could do anything with. The guys at OpenAI, the men and women at OpenAI, created a new way of training called reinforcement learning with human input, I believe. But the point is they trained it to work for humans and not just spit out everything it thought, which is, there's a metaphor in there somewhere. But what it does is it'll be able to look at what's going on out in the internet. But the bigger point to what you were saying is, as this is moving, you're almost every week something new is happening, right? And we all know about ChatGPT, but there's also, Stanford University very quickly came up with another thing. I believe they call it Llama. So did Meta, because they've got incredible talent there. The point is, it's moving so fast. Like nothing else have we been paying attention this much to something this early in the game. You know what I mean? So everything we think is true right now, every limitation may or may not get solved. So the hallucination thing that we've kind of implied, where it'll make stuff up if it doesn't know the answer, it's already dramatically better than it was. The other thing, though, Nathan, to your point about private information, a guy came up with a thing called LangChain, which is a framework that allows you to plug a large language. It doesn't have to be OpenAI. It can be any one of them. Again, Stanford has one, Anthropic has one. There's a bunch of them out there. You can plug that in and then connect it to other tools that allow you to pull in way more documents than the LLM can handle on its own, because they've only got an input that's about 10 pages. It depends on which one it is, but 10 to 50 pages. Well, a lot of times you want 1,000 pages. So they've got ways of pre-processing, and this is a lot of what we're doing at the Link right now, is how do you pre-process with construction intelligence and not just keywords or rhymes and so on. And that's really cool. That's where you can sort of begin to codify some of the knowledge that's out there, so that a young PM can do some of the things an older, more experienced PM might. There's a limit to that, right? You're not teaching anyone intuition, but at least it'll be better at searching for things that matter. So that's sort of where we are now. There are tools out there that are growing all the time that allow you with less and less effort to be able to connect this pretty powerful engine to what you want. But we come back to the fact that no one should trust this stuff on its own. No AI I've ever met is, again, except for Google. But, Google doesn't have to be that accurate. It has to, somebody once said, I'm okay with Amazon search being 60, 70% accurate because it doesn't really hurt if it's wrong. When you're actually asking someone to do their job, you need to be better than that. But everyone needs to be clear that it's not replacing a human's judgment and experience. It's augmenting it as if you had a paralegal. I mean, that's maybe an interesting way of thinking about it, is construction PMs and superintendents will now have a paralegal to help them do research and go find stuff for them. But ultimately, the lawyer does the decision making.